All right, we're live. What's up, everyone? Welcome to yet another Midwestern Mark stream on Twitch and YouTube. Got some very special guests today from the Troika Collective. Um, I guess I'll let you comrades introduce yourselves as people filter in here and talk a little bit about what you're about and what the Troika Collective is about before we start our conversation here.
Hey, yeah. Hey, y'all. My name is Comrade Libre. Eki Sankara, part of Troika Collective. We were founded in 2020 during the uprisings, and we are a anti-imperialist media collective as well as organizers and cultural workers throughout sort of island that combat imperialist lies by going to places and getting working class perspectives on the movements that are happening against imperialism. We are socialists organizing against imperialism within the belly of the beast, but also as firm internationalists supporting the revolutionary movements that are happening against imperialism in all the countries of the global south, as well as fighting for revolution here on Turtle Island against imperialism, because revolution is necessary wherever there are working class people. Poet and cultural worker based here in Miccosukee, Tequasan, Seminole Land, also known as Miami. Yes, we exist. We are here in Miami as communists. But gonna hand it over to the homie Yhamir.
Peace, y'all. Peace, y'all. So my name is Yhamir Chabur. I'm from Queens, New York, known as Occupy Lenape territory. I am of Colombian descent. I'm part of the Troika Collective. I'm happy to be part of this collective here that we create media content in order to be in solidarity with the revolutionary processes that's happening throughout Latin America and the third world. As you see, we have our name Troika from that term under the Trump administration, where his administration called, they had this term called the Troika of tyranny that they called Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, places that they had. There's a shirt right there. It's a dope shirt. Places that they needed to overthrow because they were a threat to the Western Hemisphere, but we saw it as that they're the troika of resistance, that each of these countries have had revolutions that for one way or another has shifted the continent and also inspired other revolutions within the continent. Within the continent, whether it's the Cuban Revolution, the Sandinista Popular Revolution, or the Bolivarian Revolution, we understand that we get our name from that inspiration right there. As we saw just recently with this joke of the Summit of the Americas, how Biden continued that same policy of excluding the Troika. So we've seen that Biden continued the Trump policy in Latin America, but we see that there's a pushback now. That there's many different Latin American countries that are not with the shits anymore. I don't know if I can curse here. But
Go for it.
Yeah, no, I'm saying that they're not with the shits of being treated as their backyard. And we're seeing now a shift, whether we're seeing like countries like Mexico taking a stance against this policy, like AMLO, or countries like Honduras with Xiomara Castro, or in Bolivia with their plural national state and their president Lucho Arce, and now what we're seeing right now in Colombia with this historical win, this victory, that I'm just so happy for my people right now. I'm in a jubilous, celebratory mood still. It's been 2 days, but it's an unbelievable like event, but we can get more into it as the program goes on. But I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Of course, brothers. We're happy to have you. I like how you mentioned the summit of exclusion, which I think is a good historical event to show the fact that we're entering into a new political moment in our hemisphere, where South America, Latin America in general, La Patria Grande, is becoming more united and militant against imperialism. And in this context, I think that it is important to always emphasize, especially as folks living within the belly of the beast, that the interest of the American working class is always tied to the interest of the international working class and of exploited and oppressed people abroad. So, discussing the breakdown of how to completely demolish the imperialist narratives on these countries in the global South is absolutely essential for our struggle here. We wanted to focus our conversation today on Colombia because, as you mentioned, Yhamir, we had a pretty historic victory yesterday by Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez, the first leftist government in Colombian history. Colombia does have a long history of socialist and militant struggle, right? It hasn't won, but they do have a rich history of struggle. But this is the first official time that there's been somewhat of a leftist come to power. Can you tell us a bit about the history of the Colombian struggles for socialism and where does Gustavo Petro and this Pacto Histórico movement sort of place itself with regards to that history?
Oh, yeah. That, I love that question. I love that question because I could start from any different angle, from any different point of time, whether it's the present or the past. I do feel that this right here is marking a new chapter for the Colombian people. This has shown a shift in that society. Given the fact that we've never had a progressive government, we've had very conservative governments, and I think I'm gonna start with what our queen, our new vice president Francia Marquez said during the victory speech, that for over 214 years we have been oppressed, people have been marginalized, but now we have achieved a popular government that is for the people, para el pueblo. And I say that because for over 2 centuries, ever since the betrayal of Simón Bolívar, the great liberator of South America, of somebody who had a vision for a unified Latin America with the project of El Gran Colombia, which was Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, at the time, but he wanted to expand that, to the Caribbean, even to Florida. But anyways, this oligarchy that has ruled Colombia for these 2 centuries since the betrayal of Bolívar has done nothing but been a bunch of vendepatrias, selling the territory to multinational corporations, allowing U.S. imperialism to come in and do what they want to do, whether that's to build military bases. Colombia has over 9 military bases, allow the U.S. to come in with paramilitary forces, as well as to suppress any type of change. I mean, Colombia is also known as a country where you have social leaders getting killed, but also presidential leaders getting killed as well. And one person that comes to mind is Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, the liberal popular candidate during 1948, who was assassinated. But he was seen as like this person that was supposed to win the presidential elections back in 1948. And like with having the understanding of like what went down before he was becoming before him running for the presidency, of how the U.S. Due to the United Fruit Company had a massacre, known as the Banana Massacres, where they killed a bunch of workers that were on strike, and the Colombian government, under the orders of the United Fruit Company, sent the military to go kill the workers, which awoke in Gaitan. And is like, this is important because Gaitan understood U.S. imperialism and understood the importance of agrarian reform. And like 2 days before he got assassinated, of April 9th of 1948, he actually met with a young Fidel Castro when Fidel was a university student and was going to Colombia for like an anti-imperialist, like Latin American integration forum, where he was speaking on behalf of Cuba liberation, for Puerto Rico's liberation, and against the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. So what I'm trying to go with that is, when Gaitan gets assassinated, there's this big turmoil known as the Bogotazo, where it leads Colombia into this civil war between liberals and conservatives that would pass for 10 years. and they would make a peace agreement amongst each other. These were two oligarchical factions that were in disagreements. But in the middle of that, you had farmers that had never had any representation, because one of the biggest fight for Colombia is the land. Like, Colombia is like the second country that's rich in biodiversity. Like, we're like the only country in South America that we're between the two oceans. We have a Amazon region, we have an Andean region, where we're by the Caribbean. Like, you could grow anything in Colombia, but unfortunately, like, due to that oligarchy, they don't care to invest in Colombia's rich biodiversity. What we see is like how Colombia is like is I've had young comrades from the communes, las comunas, which is the legal faction of the FARC, tell me that Colombia is worse than a neoliberalist or capitalist society. It's a semi-feudal society where you have from 4 to 6 families that own most of the land. So this has always been a fight for the land ever since, the origins of the FARC, and like the origins of the FARC comes out of the farmer struggle. And this shows that why the essence of the problem in Colombia. But to go forward with Gustavo Petro, with the win between Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez, it shows a pushback from that. A pushback from like these politics of the right, and that people in Colombia are ready. They want a shift in the way politics are being done. They want a change, a shift away from this political movement that has been in power for 20 years, Uribismo, that is its main protagonist is the ex-president of the 2000s, Álvaro Uribe Vélez, who was known for having ties to the paramilitaries and also having historical ties with the Medellin cartel of one of the famous drug dealer that he always gets Netflix series, and like you hear him on like rap lyrics of Pablo Escobar. We seen that people had a break from that type of political ideology that has turned Colombia nothing more into a narco-state. We had like our national strike last year, like the same national strike that the neighboring country Ecuador is having right now, against not just this government, but just the neoliberalist policies they try to enforce amongst the people. And that type of energy, and we'll talk about it more during the program, is what brought this win, this historic win of having our first leftist president, Gustavo Petro, who's also an ex-guerrilla. Like, he was part of the M19 movement, and also having our first Afro-Colombian woman, environmentalist leader, Francia Marquez, as the vice president.
That was a great history there. Super informative for all of us, probably. I want to pull this up too, because this is a graphic I use a lot. This just details the U.S. military presence in Colombia. I saw some people in the chat comparing it to South Korea or Israel, or I guess Honduras until recently would have been a good comparison as well. As you said there's just a giant military presence. And something you said that I thought was really interesting was, some of your friends or comrades in Colombia had almost compared it to a semi-feudal state, or said they don't even have, capitalism, which I had never thought about it that way. I just thought of it as an incredibly unequal neoliberal country. So that's really, really interesting to hear that some of the comrades in Colombia are making that analysis.
Yeah. Connected to that, you mentioned these semi-feudal conditions that many Colombians are in. What connection does that have to the drug trade and cocaine, which of course we know that the U.S. American capital and the American state and the institutions in the American state that supposedly fight against drug consumption and distribution, like the DEA, they have a central role in the distribution and production of those drugs that come out of Colombia. But what connection does the drug trade and I guess drug capital, what connection does it have to those feudal conditions, because it seems like it produces a dual surplus, both an economic surplus and the fact that it makes billions and billions of dollars, but also a political surplus because it allows, as drugs naturally do, the sort of degeneration of communities that make it sometimes difficult for those communities to fight back against the conditions which oppress them. So how does those semi-feudal conditions and the condition of Colombia in general, and some of the mass poverty that you find in Colombia, how does that relate to the somewhat unique role of drugs that the U.S. empire has inputted in Colombia in collaboration with those traditional forces of capital, which have held their power, as you mentioned, for the last 200 years, because there's never really been a major land reform in Colombia. So what role does that have in the situation we see today?
Well, I would start with saying that this oligarchy that we have in Colombia has always been subservient to the United States. Like I'll give a prime example. I mean, Panama was once part of Colombia, but because the U.S. wanted the Panama Canal, the U.S. was easily able to buy off the Colombian oligarchy in order to attain that land, in order to attain the control of the Panama Canal. And the U.S. gave them a island that they occupied from Nicaragua called San Andres, which this is why Nicaragua and Colombia has tensions over like the maritime borders. But anyhow, I mean, to like get to your question about like how the drug trade is like interconnected to the feudal society, it just kind of makes me think of like this time period of, and it's funny how I mentioned Nicaragua during the Contra Wars, when you had Ronald Reagan funding this death squad, that he called them freedom fighters. He compared them to like Thomas Jefferson, but they weren't doing anything but doing terrorist attacks and blowing up like hospitals and like trying to roll back the Sandinista revolution because they overthrew a U.S. backed dictator, Anastasio Somoza. There was a point where the U.S. Congress didn't want to fund the Contras anymore, and in order for Reagan to fund these Contras, he had to use drug money from the cartel of Medellin, of Pablo Escobar's cartel, and traffic those drugs from Panama using Manuel Noriega to California, where they had like a low-ranking drug dealer by the name of Ricky Ross, that converted the cocaine into crack and distributed all around the Black and Latino neighborhoods in order to deneutralize the Black Power movement and the young lords and the Brown Berets at the time, and use all that money to fund the Contras in order to like destabilize the Sandinistas, which they were successful at doing when they got them out of power electorally wise. I mean, through these aggressive intervention policies. But I'm saying this is a chess piece of Colombia in the drug trade, of how even the way that how the United States utilizes the drug trade in order to have an excuse to have a military presence in Colombia, and also for Colombia to be this key strategical place to attack other parts of the region. Like I could get into Venezuela, or I could get into like Haiti, for example, of how you had the ex-president Jovenel Moise that was killed by Colombian mercenaries that were probably trained in the schools of the Americas in the United States. But another thing to also keep in mind as well is that you have areas in Colombia, rural areas, where farmers don't have nothing else but to like grow the coca leaf, that's made to make cocaine, because they don't have an economy viable for them in order to sell other type of products like potatoes, like rice, like other things that they would love to sell, but due to their limitations in the Colombian market, all they could sell is the coca leaf. And also like the coca leaf is a natural plant, is a healing plant that comes from the indigenous people. I mean, I think a primary example like Evo Morales in Bolivia, before Evo Morales, took power in Bolivia, Bolivia was a narco state. I mean, Bolivia had these narco dictators like Hugo Banzer in the 1980s that that had Bolivia. I mean, yeah, they had Bolivia exporting cocaine, and the DEA was there. When Evo Morales took power, what did he do? He kicked out the DEA and turned coca into a legalized plant, you know, and all the healthy traits of that leaf, which benefited Bolivian society. I mean, you don't hear Bolivia being a narco state anymore. Same thing goes for Colombia. I mean, you've had the DEA there for like over 20 or 30 years, and Colombia is the main exporter of cocaine in the world. So just, you know, to add up all the dots, and I mean, you also have the politicians that are involved in the drug trade, like Alvaro Uribe. I mean, Alvaro Uribe has direct ties to the Medellin cartel. Like, to me, the Medellin cartel never disappeared. They turned into his political party, El Centro Democrático. You had like actually one of Pablo Escobar's hitmen that led during the 2016 vote of referendum to respect the peace accords, the Havana peace accords that Cuba led for the peace accords in between the FARC and the Colombian government. Pablo Escobar's main hitman, Popeye, I think, yeah, Popeye, led the no campaign against that. So I don't know if that answers your question right there.
Yeah, and one of the more cynical things is that in the speech that Uribe gave yesterday, it's just so ridiculous. It's so absolutely ridiculous. He talks about Pedro as the mastermind behind Chavez, and he's about to bring forth a neo-communism, and it's insane. But one of the most cynical things is that he's talking as if what Pedro is going to do to the drug trade is continue it, and as if his sort of administration and his line, which has dominated the last like 2 decades in Colombia, as if they're the ones that have been fighting against the drug trade, when he's one of the main, as you mentioned, one of the main culprits, and sort of inherited this tradition of the Medellin cartel. So what do you say about that, and how does that sort of cynicism, how does it reflect itself in the minds of everyday working and poor Colombians?
Well, I think during Alvaro Uribe's time, he was able to convince the population in Colombia that he was defending the interests of the middle class. Like, people in Colombia believed that there was a middle class that people could, work the ladder up to. And Uribe, was a person that convinced people that he was defending their interests. But he was also somebody who started a lot of neoliberalist policies, like privatizing healthcare, and privatizing education. So like he really created like this mindset during the 2000s, and also making people believe that he was winning the war against the guerrillas. There's this famous scandal called the false positive scandal, where he told the military to go kill farmers and students in the rural areas and dress them up as guerrillas to show that he was defeating the FARC. But that wasn't the case. And as well as the other thing too is that he turned Colombia the tensions between Colombia and Venezuela started with Uribe. I mean, Uribe was the arch nemesis of Hugo Chavez. He was the arch nemesis of the Bolivarian Revolution. Very good friends with the Bush administration. Had very close ties. I mean, Bush brought him over and gave him like a presidential honor Medal of Freedom, and basically like he's I think before he was held up very highly by a lot of folks, but I think it all went down with his puppet Ivan Duque. I mean, the president before him, Juan Manuel Santos, was also put into power by Uribe, but he kind of gave Uribe he turned his back on Uribe, not on some like power to the people type of stuff, but like more like capitalist stuff, because Santos comes from the oligarchy. He's a child of the oligarchy. So he wanted to defend more of U.S. multinational corporation interests in Colombia. That's the whole reason why there was a peace accord in 2016 between the FARC and the Colombian government, but which was being coordinated by Cuba and Venezuela. And when Uribe's successor, well, the other successor, Duque, who's in power right now, but he's on his door. He's on the way out right now. And we call him Porky also. So Porky is a character because you could really tell that he has no mind. He has no intelligence. Like he follows Uribe's orders, and I think due to his administration and how he dealt with Colombia as far as trying to roll back stuff like the peace accords, not really also trying to enforce more neoliberalist policies, because there was already massive protests before last year with El Paro Nacional. There was one also in 2019 when there was massive protests happening throughout the continent in Ecuador and Chile against neoliberalism. And also, going towards last year, during the pandemic, about how people saw the way he dealt with the whole situation in the country, how he tried to privatize during a time where people were unable to work, people had no access to healthcare. There was a lot of young people that wanted to migrate out, and the last thing this guy does is tries to raise the prices of food, and people went out and protest, this motherfucker. And they I think what augmented this national strike was a response by Duque's administration of unleashing the military. He unleashed the military. He militarized certain cities like Cali, a city in the West Pacific region of Colombia. And people saw that, you say you don't have money for social programs, but you have money for the military. And of course, they have a lot of money for the military. I mean, Colombia is the third recipient of U.S. military funding after Israel and Egypt. I mean, Hugo Chavez from Venezuela called Colombia the Israel of Latin America. So there was massive lives lost during these national strikes. I mean, you had people that were kidnapped, you had people that were killed, you had people that are in prison still, and people had to flee out of the country. So of course, moving towards this year, a lot of that energy came into the elections, and also just people being fed up with Uribe and Uribismo. So that answers your question.
Oh yeah, splendidly. Eddie, do you have a question? Because I had one connected to it, but I've asked the last couple, so I wanted to.
No, go for it. You've asked the same stuff I've wanted to ask for the most part, so.
I'm sure you had this one in the list, but you just mentioned the sort of killings that are done on the part of the death squads, which again are largely funded by the U.S. There's a lot of people that have been worried even before the election of Pedro, even before the victory, that something could happen to the Pedro administration. And there was, I believe, a leading general that threatened Pedro on Twitter. There's little flies flying around. There's a leading general that threatened Pedro on Twitter. So how much of a concern are those death squads? And what about the military? Because the military, from what it seems like, at least outside, seems to be in line with Uribismo.
Well, I don't know. Dude, does Comrade Libre want to take this? Because I feel like I've been talking a lot.
I got you, homie. And you can just fill in with your mass amount of knowledge of your beautiful country. So I think what we have to understand, like I said, I was in Colombia as an international observer para la primera vuelta, for the first round of elections. And what happened when we went to go is they gave us historical context on the history of Colombia in relation to elections, what you'll find is that Colombia is one of the most dangerous places to exercise your right to vote. That being said, leading up to these elections, over 44 massacres have happened. Massacres, right, of individuals in Colombia. And what is very interesting is if you look at a map, if folks are looking for really good like infographics and maps on Colombia, Indepas is a great resource that covers it. And what you'll see is the same parts of Colombia. In Spanish, it's called las regiones periferias, the periphery, the marginalized, the surrounding communities of Colombia, the places that voted en masse for Petro y Francia Marquez are also the places where all these genocides are happening, are also the places where literally going out to exercise your right to vote is a matter of life and death. And I think that is not an understatement. Literally last week, a Afro-Colombian activist, 60, I believe she was 60, between 60 63 years old, she was killed, leaving her son's house. Last week, 22 individuals, 12 of which came from the same region that that Rodolfo's from, were arrested. So there are 22 individuals from La Primera Línea that were arrested leading up to the elections. And what we'll find is that historically speaking, the same communities that both Francia Marquez and Petro represent are the same communities that historically have been the most attacked, right? These are the regions that have the highest amount of paramilitary forces. These are also happen to be the regions that produce coca, right? So there's a direct correlation with what happens in Colombia and the influence of the U.S. Why does the U.S. military have over 7 military bases in Colombia? Why in the communities that happen to produce coca? Why is that where the most violence is happening? And how does that connect to our communities in Turtle Island that are also attacked for using the drugs that were planted in our communities? And so there's a direct correlation between what happens in Colombia and what happens in Turtle Island. And I think that when I was able to go to Bogota to observe elections, I was able to make some concrete connections between the role of the U.S. military in Colombia and the fight against the so-called war on drugs in the U.S. And why do we still have a so-called war on drugs? We're not attacking the root cause because it's the governments that are working together to exploit their communities and put them either in jail or kill them. Same things are happening in both of these countries. And so, and also to give individuals context, there have been multiple death threats against Francia Marquez and Petro, which is why you may not see it on mainstream U.S. media, but it was trending in Colombia when Petro and Francia went to go out and speak. They literally had to have individuals with bulletproof shields because they literally were going into areas that that historically speaking have had activists and presidential candidates killed in the process of running to the election. So even the fact that Petro and Francia are still alive is itself a historical moment, right? And I think it's important because the elections in Colombia, unlike the elections in places like the U.S., this is a shift towards the left, a historical shift towards the left, but also this is the first time that a leftist candidate has not been killed in the process of running for elections. And that and we have to be vigilant because, right, August 7th is when they get into power. But our role as internationalists, right, in praxis, right? We talk about being internationalist in theory. Being internationalist in praxis is to uphold the fact that over 11 million Colombians went out to exercise their right to vote, and a majority of these individuals went out knowing that there were not any government notices saying that they were protected. So the other thing to note is that in Colombia, that there has been no government that has been able to guarantee the safety of individuals going out to exercise their right to vote. Never has there been a government that has been able to address that. Francia Marquez and Petro, that both come from regions that run high risks if they vote, have made that part of their platform. To move towards a Colombia that fights for peace and that fights for love, that is able to address the paramilitary individuals in these regions. And as we were talking about a little bit earlier, Yhamir and I, right, the ELN, which is a paramilitary force, has just released a statement saying they are willing to meet with Petro to talk about demilitarizing the paramilitary forces and talk about peace, because there also has not been any government up to now that has agreed to uphold the peace accords that were signed in 2016. And so Petro and Francia Marquez represent a lot of the wishes and hopes of, as Francia Marquez would say, the people that did not have a voice up to now, right? And so this election was a matter of life and death for a lot of individuals, mostly the ones that did go out to vote for Francia Marquez and Gustavo Petro.
That's incredible. I mean, the fact that they could have died in the process of campaigning. It's like Carlos and I both worked for the Burning campaign, before we continued in our political development a little bit. But our main critique of the campaign was that they were sending us to like too high income of neighborhoods. We wanted to go to some of the poorer neighborhoods. Like, it reminds me of something Carlos and I were talking about the other day. Like, Western leftists almost just have no idea or no concept of what it would be like to go into a place, to try and organize where you might die, where you might be killed by paramilitary forces or, the US-backed fascist groups that they put on the ground in pretty much anywhere where the empire is targeting. And it's crazy. And you talk about, being internationalist in praxis. And yeah, I think it's super important to show solidarity with these movements, and then also to study them, just so, as Western leftists who are in a completely different context, not to say the US couldn't devolve into fighting and violence at some point, but for now, a completely different context than the places that the U.S. empire has been destabilizing for years. I don't know. I think it's really important and useful for us to study that. And as you said, give solidarity and practice in any way that we can.
Yeah. Right before Yhamir gets back on, because I think we're going to make similar points, so it's going to tie into it. Even the understanding the context of how Pacto Histórico was formed, right? Pacto Histórico is a left unity, right? It is a left unity that is made up of the Partido Comunista de Colombia, Unión Patriótica, the Liberal Party, right? So ideologically, they don't necessarily agree, but what they do agree on is that Colombia needs to be in a position of power in favor of the working class. And so they united to create the Pacto Histórico, and they won. And that being said, a lot of the individuals that are carrying on this work are individuals that have lost individuals. For example, I had the opportunity to interview Maria Jose Pizarro, the daughter of Carlos Pizarro, who was a presidential candidate from the left that was massacred. He was one of 4 presidents in a short time span that were massacred. And so Colombia comes from a history where the people have not been able to heal, and Uribismo was pushing the knife deeper into the heart of the Colombian people and killing it. And so what this represents is also an opportunity not only for Colombians to move to the left, but also to actually vote in favor of tangible change away from a narco dictatorship, away from governments that have been historically exploiting the Colombian people. Yhamir?
Yeah, yes, brother. I just wanted to add on. So that general Carlos you were talking about, his name is Edgardo Zapatero, and he actually violated when he made that threat to Petro on Twitter. He actually violated electoral policies that military personnel are not supposed to be getting involved. But that just shows one of the biggest hurdles that Petro and Francia and their administration are going to have. I mean, the big hurdle itself of them getting elected and coming into state power, you know, they've achieved that. I mean, it wasn't easy because of the amount of death threats that Petro and Francia received, the amount of ineptitude from the part of the Duque administration that did not want to defend them, that they had to show up to rallies with like people having big shields. I don't know. You could check this out on like videos and stuff of them having speeches. Like there was one speech that Francia Marquez gave. I think it was like the night. It was like the night before the first round of the elections that, you know, she had like a laser beam pointed at her, you know, and the two guards right there, like with the big shields, had to like shield that beam, but she still kept speaking. You know, she's, you know, like to me that was very powerful. That made me think about a lot about Jorge Lazar Gaitan. And that just showed how, you know, this was life and death, like Libre said. You know, people are fed up in Colombia. People are sick and tired. You know, they want to change, and people are now willing to organize and fight for that change. But it's not to say that there's going to be obstacles. I mean, Petro and Francia still, their life is at risk. I mean, they still are at risk of getting killed and assassinated. And now more than ever, like having a military apparatus, you know, the general, you know, that we all know now is Uribista, and, you know, like military soldiers there trained by the schools of the Americas. So they have a lot to that's on their plate. But I think the important part is how they're achieving national unity. And this is one thing I think about with the peace accords, is that what the peace accords does more for Petro's movement is strengthen it more. Why I say that? Because a lot of the guerrilla movements in Colombia kind of lost their popular connection with the people, and they've had to like reconcile that with these peace accords. So and that has been interrupted with because of Uribismo, because of Porky, you know, Uribe's puppet. But now with Petro, you know, Petro being even a guerrilla coming from the M19 guerrilla movement, who as well had to do a peace deal in the 90s with the Colombian government, is now more than ever able to achieve that goal of, like, you know, sitting down with a guerrilla army like the ELN, El Ejército Liberación Nacional, um, and able to now have them in the fold, you know, with the people again. So yeah, I mean, we have to be very, and also the paramilitaries too. We have to also not forget them either, because the paramilitaries are they're the dirty army of the U.S. multinational corporations that go out there and kill social leaders. You know, kill people like Francia Marquez. You know, Francia Marquez, like I said, her ascension to vice president is very powerful, just because she's somebody that comes from a small village in the north part of Cauca, a historical Afro-Colombian village. She's also an environmentalist activist. She's also been somebody who's been displaced twice, you know. So she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, because she organized Afro-Colombian women to get a U.S. mining U.S. mining company out of her territory. So, you know, like, Francia, big time, is basically the voice of the nobodies. Like she said, she's the voice of the nobodies, respectfully speaking, the people who have been marginalized. So there's a lot there's a lot of challenges, but we have to face that with a lot of revolutionary optimism. A lot of revolutionary optimism, because these elections were a big time win, not just for Colombia, but for the whole continent. You know, you have people tuning in to these elections because they understood that if Petro and Francia win, it would be a big time shift towards the right wing and the fascists in the continent.
You're absolutely right, brother. And I think that the context that you provided is the sort of stuff that you can't really get when you're outside. And you're right, it's revolutionary optimism and also revolutionary courage, which is what Francia showed in that speech, where the laser was pointed at her. I remember seeing that video circulate, and it's just, it's insane, right? The sort of contrast. And one of the things that you mentioned, Comrade Libre, was that Colombia is one of the most, or the most dangerous places to exercise the right to vote. And you mentioned that just over the last few months with this election, there's been 40 something, I think 43, 44 people killed, activists killed. So I want to, just provide a little context for how absurd the Summit of the Exclusions, passing itself as the Summit of the Americas, was. That Colombia was invited as a democracy, but the Troika, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua were excluded. And along with Colombia, you could also add Bolsonaro, who was invited and who had a one-on-one sit-down with Uncle Joe, and not the one that we like. But it's just incredible that you have this sort of society that is perhaps as undemocratic as you can get, and it's officially recognized as free and democratic by the empire. And then countries like Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are excluded. And in the case of Venezuela, like there's not been one person from the opposition that I know of over the last 60 years killed in Cuba. And the same holds for Nicaragua and Venezuela. I mean, for fuck's sakes, Juan Guaido is still walking around, right? For us old school Marxist-Leninists, that guy shouldn't be walking in that continent at all, maybe not on Earth. So how are these undemocratic societies, but then they turn around and look at Colombia, where just running a campaign is a life-risking event, and they call that democratic. But I wanted to switch the attention, since I brought up the Summit of the Americas, and perhaps you can comment a little bit before you address the next question. But one of the critiques that seems to be emerging, which isn't really a critique, but it seems to be more of a kind of a point of nuance, is about the limitations of Pedro and Marquez, because there have been statements made not too favorable to that Troika that we all inspire ourselves so much in. So we've had over the last year a couple disappointments with left-wing victories. We had Pedro Castillo, who I remember we covered very closely and we were ecstatic about, and then that didn't end up as planned. It started more excited than we were even expecting, but it kind of crashed. And then you also had Gabriel Boric, which was perhaps even more of a disappointment, because at least it seemed to be less pressure than with Castillo. But I mean, the fool literally went up to Allende's statue before he was declared president, and he bowed in front of it. And then he turns around and not only doesn't boycott the summit, but praises Biden and condemns Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. It's just absurd. So in the context of these sort of two disappointments in Castillo in Peru and Boric in Chile, some people have wondered what are the sort of limitations that the progressiveness of the Pacto Histórico victory has, considering some of the comments previously made on Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. Do you think it's going to be an anti-imperialist force in the region? I think that personally, even just existing and passing progressive things and not having beat a guy like Rodolfo Fernandez, who says that he's an admirer of Adolf Hitler, that's definitely something good. But how anti-imperialist is Pacto Histórico going to be, assuming hopefully that they're able to survive and somewhat implement the things that they have been fighting for?
Well, I think what we have to understand is Pacto Histórico is a move to the left. Given the context that left has been in favor of U.S. imperialism, has been in favor of narco dictatorships, a move to the left simply means that it's not that. Okay, so people should not make unrealistic expectations, especially considering the remarks that Petro has made in terms of critiques or observations that he has made of Troika, right? But I think realistically speaking, what we have to understand is the Pacto Histórico, and this has been said. This has been said by Francia Marquez. This has been said by Petro. Pacto Histórico is not Petro. It's not Francia Marquez. It's the people that went out to vote. It's the over 11 million Colombians that decided that there needs to be a change in Colombia. So at the end of the day, it is the task of Colombians now to hold their government that they have put into a position of power, to hold them accountable to the things that they want. And although Petro, the observation, to be clear, are they anti-imperialists? It's nuanced. I wouldn't say they're straight up anti-imperialists. I wouldn't say, like, if they were for the Troika, they probably would have been dead by now, to be honest, right? They have politics that push the country where it needs to go right now, understanding that revolution is a process. This is the first phase of Colombia to move towards a government where Colombians can stay in Colombia, and that you can create a Colombia for Colombianos, Colombianas, Colombianes, right? And so we shouldn't be disenchanted. Now, there does need to be accountability. We are going to be able to critique, because as Yhamir properly observed, right, this is going to be an uphill battle, right? This is the first phase. So this is the first time in over 200 years that Colombia has elected a left government into power, and that left government is going to have to push back against 214 years of right-wing government and right-wing thinking and backwards thinking. And so we do have to be vigilant. This is also why it is the role of internationalists to support working class Colombians that have voted in favor of Pacto Histórico, to not consume the mass media that's going to be pushed out against the Petro and the Marquez government, right? Because we can expect attacks quite soon. We've already seen some of them, but we have to be a lot more principled. We have to understand that working class Colombians are not going to have a mass platform in the U.S. So it is going to be the role of individuals that want to be informed about what's happening in Colombia to look for alternative resources and news that is not based in the U.S. government, or that is anti-imperialist and based in Turtle Island. And so this is our role, right, to discuss, so that people are also not feeding into the fact that some individuals think that that this government does not represent Colombians. Which Colombians? Be specific, because we need to incorporate the class analysis, and we have to understand that Pacto Histórico represents working class Colombians specifically, not the bourgeoisie, not the business owning Colombians, but the working class Colombians that took a life or death risk to exercise their right to vote for change in their country. What we also understand is that the Petro and Francia Marquez government functions within the contradictions. There are more than one military base in Colombia. That being said, Francia Marquez has made it very clear that they plan on opening relationships and recognizing Maduro as the government of Venezuela, right? And why? Well, Francia Marquez comes from Cauca, which, if you look at a map of Colombia, is the northern region of Colombia that is on the border with Venezuela, whose economy has been affected because under Uribe, they closed relations with Venezuela, closed the border, hence hindering the economic development of the region of Cauca, which happens to be Afro-Colombian, which happens to be indigenous. And so this voting for Pacto Histórico is a move towards improving the life of working class Colombians, not by definition necessarily anti-imperialist, but it does work against imperialism, and it does work in favor of working class Colombians. And it's also looking to uphold the peace accords, which folks should really look at the 2016 peace accords that took place in Cuba. Right, these are things that will affect some of the most affected people that have never in the history of Colombia had a platform to have their issues censored or addressed. And so what we can expect out of the Petro and Marquez government is that they will be pushing, hopefully, for to address the working class issues on the platform that they ran on. What we can also expect is that they exist in the contradiction of not having a majority of individuals as senators. What we can expect is that the U.S. military and the DEA are, if they haven't already, looking to intervene in what it looks like to have democracy in Colombia. And we just need to look to recent events. Comrade Yhamir went to an event in New York protesting against university because they invited Duque to talk about democracy, when just last year there was a mass suppression of Colombians uprising, especially in Cali, which folks can look up the 2011 paros in Colombia, Puerto de Resistencia, where Afro-Colombians and indigenous Colombians in the port were protesting for their rights, and they were being suppressed. This was being funded by the U.S. government, no surprise. But, right, that was in the eyes of the everyone looking inside Colombia, that was a pat on the back to Duque for fighting against uprisings and anarchists and XYZ. So we have to understand where the narratives are coming from and always question, right? And in supporting the working class Colombians, we have to understand that there are going to be the contradictions, but we're going to have to be in solidarity with the working class Colombians through those contradictions and do our best to educate individuals to be in support of working class Colombians, even whether or not there is the contradiction of Petro not being able to do something that they said they were going to do, right? We don't live in an ideal world. We are scientific social. I'm scientific socialist for a reason, because I believe revolution is going to have its specific characteristics based on the country that it's in, but it's also going to have its specific contradictions, right? There are very few countries that can say they have more than 7 U.S. military bases on them. That is going to be a factor. The fact that a majority of cocaine in the world comes from Colombia is going to be a factor. But as internationalists, we have to be willing to push back against those contradictions in favor of working class Colombians, to support those working class Colombians, because unfortunately, we live in a society where, because they are fighting against imperialism, more Colombians are going to die, far less than if we were to have a Rodolfo government. But it is going to happen because imperialism is going to try to keep its claws in Colombia because it's one of the strongholds, one of the last strongholds that it has. Also, when we're talking about Petro and his critiques of Troika, and we're talking about Boris, and we're talking about Castillo, right? We have to understand that what we are observing is a shift to the left. We're not observing a shift to socialism. We're observing a shift to the left that exists in the contradictions. And a lot of the current governments have had very strong ties with the US government. So a shift to the left is literally that. Don't take it for more than what it is. It is a shift to the left. It is the role of working class people in these countries to continue to pushing left till we can achieve socialism, so we can achieve communism. And that is going to be the same thing, the same case in Colombia, where it is going to be the revolutionary task to uphold, to push these countries further left in favor of working class people globally. And so that being said, right, yes, Petro does exist within these contradictions, but also we have already seen him, knowing that he's going to win, shift some of his perspectives. He is willing to recognize Maduro. We have already seen how Venezuelans treat Guaido, who is the fucking president of Narnia or whatever the fuck. But right, and so so these exist, right? Francia Marquez is going to be pushing to open up relations with Venezuela. What does that also mean? That means that 6 million Colombians that are currently in Venezuela in the next elections are going to have access to vote. That's a powerful thing, something that did not exist in this election, something that could have allowed for a first-time victory for Petro and Francia Marquez, so that there wouldn't have to be a second round. Right? So there are 6 million Colombians waiting to participate in their own country's elections, in their own country's rebuilding of a new Colombia. And so there is a lot to look forward to. It will not be without critiques, but we have to be principled enough to support this working class movement, understanding that there are figureheads that are going to be leading this movement, but that ultimately the working class Colombians are going to continue to fight for this thing called democracy that does not exist in the US, in Turtle Island, right? That they are trying to form in their new country, in this Nuevo Colombia that they are creating.
Beautifully said, brother. One of the things we often emphasize is that revolution is a process. If you keep that in mind, you realize you're not expected, you can't judge things according to what the books say the end is supposed to look like. And because it's a process is why you have to realize, as you said perfectly, that there's different starting points and different concrete conditions for how that process is going to look, right? In some places, the beginning of that process is already a little bit ahead. In other places like Colombia, when you've had 200 straight years of the far right ruling and of capital's absolute dominance over labor and working people, obviously the beginning of the process is going to look like it's a bit backwards in terms of in relation to some other countries that were able to directly start off with an anti-imperialist government. So I think perfectly said. Yhamir, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean to add, I guess, like, you know, what brother Libre was saying, Comrade Libre was saying, you know, this win right here is historic. Just just for the fact that it's a big time pushback from U.S. imperialism. It's a big time pushback from U.S. dominance, and it shows how the U.S. is losing its grip in the continent. I mean, with a country like Colombia that has so much invested militarily wise, and how, you know, Colombia is a strategic point for the U.S. to attack Venezuela. Like, there's been a lot of these operations, whether it was Operation Gideon, where they called the Bay of Piglets, where you had like these mercenaries that were trained by, I forgot the brother's name, but it was like these veterans from Afghanistan, that they tried to I don't know, they had like a movie in their minds. They thought about Rambo or something like that, because they were trying to wing it like on some Rambo shit, and they went in and they got neutralized by Afro-Venezuelan fishermen that were part of the militia, la Miliciano Bolivariana, and but all of that was launched from Colombia. It was launched from the Colombian territory, and there's been multiple attacks, I mean, from paramilitary forces to try to get into Venezuela. And also the concert that they had, the SOS Venezuela concert, where they tried to like sneak in weapons under the gist of humanitarian aid. So it's gonna be very interesting that now, you know, Colombia is gonna reestablish relations with Venezuela. Gustavo Petro, you know, even though he's had his comments and his critiques about Venezuela and Nicaragua, he's been very careful with Cuba. I feel like with Cuba, he's he's respectful because of the peace accords. Like he's also, the thing too is that like what people have to understand is that Colombia is very anti-communist. Like that there's a sphere of anti-communism that's very entrenched due to the oligarchy and U.S. intervention and propaganda. I could also go into how Colombia's also been a base not just militarily but also think tanks, you know, against like anti-communism, anti-socialist movements in the region. I mean, if you know, we're gonna soon talk about Ecuador. I mean, Guillermo Lazo's campaign, if it wasn't for Alvaro Uribe helping him out with the propaganda tools of, you know, these terms like Castro Chavismo, Guillermo Lazo wouldn't have gotten far in Ecuador. But like Petro, you know, he has to be very careful, and he's smart. You know, he knows that they're gonna Venezuelan bait him. They're gonna like try everything to like try to compare him to Maduro, or try to say that that he's gonna turn Colombia into Venezuela. And what they mean by that, what they try to express by that, is that Venezuela is a failed state. You know, when you know Colombia is worse than Venezuela. You know, Colombia has inequality, there's massive unemployment, massive violence, social leaders getting killed. It's not to say that Venezuela doesn't have problems. I mean, Venezuela, it has economic problems, but that's due to sanctions. That's due to illegal unilateral coercive measures brought by the economic war of the U.S., which has caused Venezuela massive inflation, and has a sector of its population migrate to Colombia and other South American nations. But some of them migrate back because they really don't see like any future in like countries where, you know, there's not even future for the people there, for the natives there either. So yeah, I mean, Petro, there was a debate he had that I found interesting. There was a question in the debate that was given to him that he said, "Oh, you know, is Maduro gonna come to your inauguration?" And he was like, "No." But the way he answered it was very intelligently, because he said there's no relations between Colombia and Venezuela. You know, I mean, he didn't have to say he didn't have to bring out the elephant in the room, how Porky recognizes this, you know, fake dweeb of Juan Guaido. But yeah, no, Petro said that once relationships are reestablished, then we could talk about Maduro coming to the inauguration. But I do feel though that let me see. I have a picture that I feel like is a picture that I actually was like the first one to put it up. It's now circulating. It's right here with Petro and Chavez.
We shared it. We shared it yesterday.
Yeah.
It's on our Instagram, I believe.
I think that was in 1994, and that's after Hugo Chavez got out of prison, and it was like an event in Colombia. It was at in un foro de Simón Bolívar, but it was in this institution called Simón Rodriguez. That was Simón Bolívar's teacher, a big important thinker also in Latin America. But so I do feel that I have a belief that like Petro has Bolivarianism. A lot of people say that he's not part of the Bolivarian momentum. Part of me disagrees with that, just because I feel like, you know, he comes from a movement, M19, a guerrilla movement, which, you know, a lot of it was like a mixture of like national patriotism and democratic socialism. And they would do stuff symbolically, like try to rob the sword of Bolivar for the people. Or I think they like occupied the Dominican Republic consulate. But and also is also to say, like, they say, you know, when Petro was the mayor of Bogota, he put up in his office a portrait of Simón Bolivar, which after his tenure, when he left his office, the portrait was put down, and then they put up like the guy who historically betrayed Simón Bolivar, Francisco Pau de Santander. So like there's a sentiment of Bolivarianism with Petro. You know, like Petro in his speech, he talked about sitting down with the United States and having the United States recognize our diversity as Latin Americans, as like we need to coexist in this hemisphere. Um, there's this sense, but it's very passive. I'm not trying to say that Petro's like Hugo Chavez in any sense, but um, like I said, everything has to start somewhere. You know, like there can be massive critiques. I could easily talk about how Hugo Chavez, when he first became the president of Venezuela, he didn't claim himself as a socialist. He started claiming socialism when he in 2005. 21st century socialism. When he first got into power, he spoke about this third way between capitalism and socialism, but talked about how he was a fan of the Cuban Revolution. But after he got cooled by the oligarchy, he saw that he had to, you know, just shift his mind into supporting more socialism and opening himself up more as a socialist. So, like, yeah, I do, you know, and I also, this also came to mind too. Even if people think that Petro might have his doubts of the Troika, best believe the Troika is supporting Petro. You know, the Troika is, because Twitter, for example, you had Diaz-Canel that said congratulations to Petro in Francia, Maduro that said congratulations to Petro in Francia, and Daniel Ortega too. There was a tweet from Nicaragua as well. So there's you know, like we also have to be kind of like understanding like things have to start somewhere. Like Libre said it like very well, very eloquently. It's not like a shift to like an anti-imperialist movement. This is a shift to the left, but like historically, like Colombia, you know, this is powerful just because now they're gonna be able to have a chance to have a popular government, and hopefully Petro and Francia are able to sow the seeds, you know, of anti-imperialism within the Colombian youth, within Colombian society. So we have to we have to be positive. We have to be optimistic. I mean, the best thing here though is that Venezuela doesn't have that much of an aggressor like before, like with Duque. And then this is gonna help Venezuela with the sanctions as well, having these relations. So yeah.
Yeah, we published an article actually about how they were celebrating the victory of Petro in Venezuela, which goes to what you were saying there, that you know the Troika is definitely celebrating this victory, even if they can't be openly anti-imperialist. And we had some people asking for sources to kind of break through the imperialist U.S. media bullshit in the chat, and people were sharing some good ones. So if y'all have any that I miss, you can let me know. But this is one that Comrade Libre shared. What is this called, Comrade? Sorry, my Spanish is a work in progress.
Infobay. I think it's like Spanglish, but it's a resource that dives into like statistics. So like, how did people vote? Who voted for Petro? Who voted for Rodolfo? Who voted en blanco, which means they decided not to vote for anybody, and then null votes. Which a lot of those null votes, to be specific, were from the consulates outside of the U.S. or outside of Colombia. Because as somebody that went to Colombia to observe, and then someone that in La Segunda Vuelta, the second round, I went to observe here in Miami. Here in Miami, like they got caught trying to do a lot of fraud. People were voting 2 times for Rodolfo. People's voting ledgers were already marked, which would make it null. But if you're not paying attention, you wouldn't observe that. So there have been a lot of attempts to discredit and move. But this is a good resource that really breaks down statistically who voted in favor, who didn't, and gives a decent analysis. I hope they have an option to make it into English, but numbers are universal, so you can look at numbers. There's also indepas.org that CO. And there's also the Center for Hemispheric Affairs. There's a few really good articles, as well as the Alliance for Global Justice has released some really good content. And Black Alliance for Peace. Our comrades at Black Alliance for Peace are always doing some really good internationalist work. They were also observing elections in Cali, Colombia. And Red Condor is the last one that I will add. Red Condor Collective.
Forget about Troika.
I have Troika pulled up here. It's one of the ones I was going to show.
I was going to say, you said, did you mention multipolarista?
Oh, that's a good one.
That's a good one, multipolarista. We were actually on multipolarista with Ben Norton. I mean, talking about the first round of the elections. And I think Orinoco Tribune, you mentioned them. They're good. And Venezuelan analysis as well. I think they and also for people, I mean, that's read in Spanish, Misión Verdad is also another good source.
Absolutely. I think I have a couple of those pulled up that you guys mentioned, but a lot of unique ones that even some of the ones you mentioned I didn't know about. So I'm looking forward to checking those out. But here's the ones I just thought of off the top of my head. Here's obviously Troika Collective, their Instagram page. Obviously, these guys are always sharing great stuff. And then here's the Midwestern Marx archives on Colombia. We publish a lot of it. For those who don't know, we do have a website where we publish news and articles, and that's how our project started. Although we do all this streaming and stuff, so we'll republish stuff like one of our comrades mentioned the Orinoco Tribune. So here's something we republished from them about how Colombia trains and sends mercenaries around the world to help imperialism. Someone in the chat mentioned Mint Press News. They're really good. Here's something they did about a U.S. fugitive who was armed by the Colombian government and sent to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Kind of a story that goes along with what we were saying about how Colombia is used as sort of a foothold for the empire in Latin America and used as a way to attack Venezuela. I don't know how do you pronounce this?
Adolfo.
That's
Casuacha News.
That one's from after the coup.
Causechan, yeah. That's the comrades in Bolivia. They always do amazing work.
That's the comrade Camila Escalante and Ali Vargas. Yes,
Camila and Ali Vargas are also great people to follow on Twitter for news and info about Latin America. Venezuela analysis that you guys mentioned, this is my go-to for Venezuela, and it was when I was writing my senior thesis there on Venezuela. So they publish a lot on Colombia because obviously what happens in Colombia has great effects or great interest for the people of Venezuela, the working people of Venezuela. So here you can kind of get news on Colombia from a Venezuelan perspective. Here's People's Dispatch. This is another one of my favorites. Comrade Libre was talking about how, the need to make a class analysis and, not just support these left-wing or socialist leaders who take power, but the working class movements and grassroots movements behind them. And I think that's something that we fail to do sometimes on the Western left. Like, we live in this liberal hegemony. It's easy to fall into the sort of liberal great man of history fallacy, where we're just, looking at a country based on who the leader is. And then anytime something happens in that country, we're like, oh, this leader is either good or bad. I either support this or don't support this. But obviously it's more complex than that. There's a lot of different factors and different contradictions in each country. And then Telesur. This is Venezuelan state media. So they publish good stuff about Colombia as well. So yeah. Anyone else got something they want to add here?
No, that trio of Multipolarita, Orinoco, and Venezuela analysis, we republish a lot from them. I just wanted to emphasize, perhaps, as my specific closing for the topic of Colombia, I'd like to hopefully get on the topic of Ecuador if you comrades have time. But I mentioned the anti-imperialism thing because of the reactions that getting on social media to this victory. And one of the things that leaves out, or the emphasis is more so symbolic on what has been said. But if you analyze the policies that Pedro and Marquez are putting forward with Pacto Histórico, by dealing with national affairs, they're also crumbling what is one of the strongholds for U.S. imperialism in the region. So they're being maybe not directly symbolic, but as a latent effect of fixing the country and democratizing it, they're also actively doing anti-imperialism. Because as you mentioned, Yhamir, some of the main operations in the last 2 years of or in 2022, in the last 3-4 years of U.S. operations against Venezuela, they've came out of Colombia. So if they're able to limit that as part of the process of moving away from death squads and the violence that takes place in the streets, if they limit that, they're also creating conditions for Latin America to flourish and to not have these constant training of these death squads in Colombia to do the dirty job of imperialism in the region.
I was gonna add really quickly. My bad. I just because I had a chance to meet Francia Marquez when she came to New York City a couple of months ago. This is when she was running for the presidency. And I'll tell you this: she's very well aware of how like these paramilitaries get the same training as like say the police here in the United States. Like she connected the dots very well. She understood about how the oppression of like Black and brown people from the police state here is intertwined with like the paramilitary forces that oppress Black and indigenous Colombians in Colombia. That's all I just had to say.
Comrade Libre, did you have a comment?
Yeah. The comment that I was gonna make on this is we have to stop being so dogmatic. We have to understand. First of all, we live in a country where we have not consolidated power in favor of working class people. So, people in Sur Island, let's observe that there is a leftist victory in Colombia. Second of all, what we also have to observe is we cannot bring our pessimism of recent other elections into the conversation of Colombia and try to compare them so subjectively, right? Again, revolution is going to be specific to the conditions of said country. So what is happening in Peru, what is happening in Chile, what is happening in Honduras, and what is happening in Colombia are all different. They are moves to the left, but the extent of that left movement is specific to that country, right? And so in Colombia, they just elected a leftist government that we must support as well as critique, and that we have a duty to connect with the working class folks of these countries to help them continue to uphold the thing that they have been fighting for, that they finally been able to achieve. And you can find some of these organizations or find connections to some of the work that's already being done through some of the organizations, right? Like Troika, like Red Condor Collective, that are helping to build connections with our comrades over there to not say how we should support Colombians, but rather to hear what Colombians are asking of us to do for them as they continue to fight and live in the reality that they are trying, in the Colombia that they're trying to construct, this new Colombia. And so let's also let's observe what is happening in Colombia. Let's support what is happening in Colombia, and let's not try to compare it to other places until we can see tangibly what is or is not being done. But also understanding that we are supporting movements, we are not supporting people, because it is the masses of the people that carry on a movement. And essentially, the people that got elected into office this past weekend were the working class Colombian people, were the Afro-Colombians, were the indigenous Colombians, were the women, were the individuals that have made sacrifices like Unión Patriótica, like Partido Comunista, that have been attacked historically, right? This is a victory for the people of Colombia, right? We just have names for these people, right? But Petro and Francia represent the masses of Colombians. So let's be very clear that the fight that they're taking politically is one that has been fought with blood, sweat, and tears tangibly over the last 214 years. And that is itself a huge victory for the people of Colombia.
Beautifully said, brother. Do we want to give any last final comments on Colombia before we roll into the topic of Ecuador? I think we could probably treat that as its own topic. Eddie, what do you think?
Yeah. I think we should. I mean, this has been super informative, but we've been going for about an hour and a half on Colombia now, so we should probably switch gears. If the comrades have time and want to share their knowledge on Colombia, we'd love to hear it. I mean, sorry, on Ecuador. The last thing I wanted to add is I see people in the chat saying they're optimistic watching this podcast, this stream. I think there's reason to be optimistic, at least if you take a global perspective. I mean, the U.S. empire and capitalist imperial hegemony is fading. The imperialism, which is the highest stage of capitalism, is starting to weaken. And there's an anti-imperialist alliance being formed against the U.S. And, it is inspiring because, like, you were saying something earlier. I can't remember which one of you was saying it. But you're saying that Uribismo was basically trying to drive a stake or a knife into the heart of the Colombian people. And it's like the U.S. empire for years has done everything they can to kill the revolutionary spirit of the people all across Latin America. We were sharing this infographic earlier of Operation Condor. I mean, the U.S. was funding and arming paramilitaries, putting in U.S.-backed puppet dictators like the Pinochet dictatorship, who were massacring people in the National Soccer Stadium. And the CIA were giving kill lists to their preferred leaders in Latin America, just with names of leftists. Anybody, communist, socialist, any kind of left-wing ideology, they could be killed and hunted down by the puppets of the U.S. empire. So, and the CIA was training these dictators up in the torture techniques that they developed in MK Ultra. So it's like everything that the U.S. empire has, or everything that they could have tried to do to wipe the revolutionary spirit out of Latin America, they've tried to do, and it hasn't worked. We've seen this, the pink wave, and now is sort of like what we call a second pink wave, where all these leftists, if they're not, fully socialist or Marxist leaders, coming to power. And that's symbolic, but Colombia especially, because it's for so long been a stronghold of the empire. The fact that there's any kind of left-wing movement in Colombia, despite the fact that they're literally, risking their lives, risking being killed by the imperialists, like, it shows that the power is still with the masses, and the idea that the struggle for socialism is over and we reached an end of history when the USSR fell is ridiculous. And I think anyone who still believes that needs to take a look at Latin America.
It's there's a sort of metaphor that Fidel gives Salvador Allende in 1971 in their encounter. He says that Latin America has a baby in its womb, and that baby is revolution. And whether it's born on a shanty town or whether it's born in a fancy hospital, it will be born. And I think that's what we've been seeing over the last couple of years. But any closing remarks on Colombia before we shift gears into Ecuador?
Libre, you want to go first, or?
I got you. I just want to say again, let's remember to be in solidarity, like in praxis, and to do our research and to dismantle the lies that will be told And these are things we can prepare for. We can expect that anytime that anything that does not support imperialism, that there will be attacks. And so please look at the resources that we have shared and continue to do research. Understand that we do not live and in Colombia, that this is not a move towards idealism. This is a move towards this process called revolutionary, and this is simply the first step. And so in this first phase, and a historic move towards the left, like, let's be in solidarity with Colombia despite the contradictions, and also attempt to do our due diligence for the people of Colombia and organize and overthrow imperialism, because that is our role here where we find ourselves in Turtle Island. Our revolutionary task is to not only support the revolutions that do exist, the revolutions that are happening, but also to fight for revolution here on Turtle Island. And also free Puerto Rico, and shout out to Colombia, because this brings us closer to our liberation for independence from the US government.
Independencia para Puerto Rico. Yeah, I was actually at fun fact, yesterday I was actually at a committee, the decolonization committee in the UN for Puerto Rico, which was started by Cuba, and it turned 50 years yesterday. So I remember talking about that, what happened in Colombia, like the example that we gave, as a people, fighting, to achieve our first popular government in these electoral ballots, was an example that we were giving to the whole continent, that things are possible, and that a free Puerto Rico is possible, a free Palestine is possible, and also a Cuba without a blockade is possible as well. So now I'm trying to really be very concise, because I'm Colombian, and this is like very a very emotional moment for me, because something I didn't share is also like I have family that were also part of the guerrillas as well, like my father and my uncle, who also voted for Petro. I had my father at he was locked up with Petro's comrades in M19, so, and was forced to be exiled out of Colombia for like 20 years. I mean, he had to flee out and everything. But this win right here is like, it means a lot for my father, and it was on Father's Day too. It was a great gift. And also something also cool to note, like when I think about it, is just the way how Petro's movement M19 was born on the 19th. His birthday's on the 19th, and they were victorious on the 19th. June 19th. So that's a very powerful number. But yeah, anyways, Gustavo Petro being our new first leftist president, ex-guerrilla too, and as well as Francia Marquez, that she's an Afro-Colombian woman. And the reason why I keep emphasizing that is the fact that Colombia, we're like Brazil as well. We are an African nation, like we are the third country outside of the African diaspora to have a high population of Afro descendants, after Brazil, after the US, and Haiti's right after us. And also it's just, I also got to share this too, because this is very emotional for me too. I had a brother from Haiti that I met in Venezuela last year, that he's in France right now, that called me the day after the elections, and he was like, yo, that this means a lot for us in Haiti as well. Like, I want you to know that. And I was like, I understood, because of Francia, because of Francia Marquez being a black woman, and she's just very, very black, and I love it. You know what I mean? Because it shows the diversity of our people that never get a voice, and she knows that as well. She knows that she represents that diversity, not for the Afro-Colombian community, but also for the indigenous and for the other marginalized. She said this in her speech. She says she thanks the indigenous, the Afro, the women, the LGBTQ, the farmers, all the different sectors, the youth as well. How Petro said how he's planning to as well free the youth that are locked up right now because of last year's national strike. And also how it was also powerful too, how he had the mother of a woman that lost her son, Dylan Cruz, in right there, right in the speech. So this really brought like it felt very grassroots. It felt very organic. And this is the whole main part of this too. Like Francia, for example, she's not a traditional politician. Like when Trump talks about I'm not a traditional politician, Francia is not really a traditional politician. She's never taken a political seat. She comes from the grassroots, literally, as a black woman organizer against mining, against for the environment. So this right here is very powerful. Like I said, once again, this is a victory not just for the Colombian people, but for also La Patria Grande, for Latin America, because everybody was watching that, whether it was people from Cuba, the president from Cuba, the president from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Honduras, the ex-president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, Evo Morales. So we've made history, and when I say we, not just Colombia, but us Latin Americans too, that we're getting closer to that unification, because when one of us win, we all win. And that's how I felt yesterday, and that's how I know that things are possible. Like I said, again, a free Puerto Rico is possible, a Cuba without a blockade is possible, a free Palestine is possible, and a socialist revolution one day in the Turtle Island is also possible. We just gotta believe. We gotta figure out how we unify as a people. But yes, I'm very like I said, I'm full of jubilious. I'm very celebratory right now. I'm gonna be like this for like a whole week. I can't wait to party more with my people this coming weekend, and I can't wait to go. I'm gonna plan to go to Colombia this August 7th to see that inauguration, that historic inauguration, of our ex-guerrilla first leftist president Gustavo Petro, and our first female Afro vice president queen Francia Marquez.
Hell yeah! I don't know if anyone could put it in a better way. Well, thank you for talking to us about Colombia. We're gonna switch real quick to the topic of Ecuador, which always isn't too far, just because of how connected La Patria Grande is. So I think it'd be helpful to do something similar to what we did with Colombia, sort of trace some of the historical roots of the left socialist indigenous movement in Ecuador, because there seems to be some interesting tensions that, for instance, we don't see in Colombia. Right, in Colombia, we saw in Pacto Histórico. Both of you comrades were mentioning how diverse the different parties and organizations within Pacto Histórico are. And there seems to be in Ecuador a unity that's missing between the indigenous left struggles and the environmentalist struggles, and the struggles of what was the established democratic socialist left with Correa. So just to put it in context, we have someone here who said it nicely. 9 days of national strikes in Ecuador. So that's the context that we're in, and it seems like it's going.
Uh-oh. We lose Carlos.
Hello?
We can hear you. Your camera's frozen.
Do you guys hear me? Oh, I think I froze.
Not here now.
You're coming back.
Yeah, you're coming back.
Okay. So just to repeat that, we're on the 9th day of the strike in Ecuador. So can you give us a little bit of the context of why are we here in Ecuador? And if you could start the sort of narrative, it's always good, especially when you're trying to teach or get a message out there, to paint things, I think, as a sort of narrative, as a story. What happened that allowed Correa to get into power, and what sort of splits took place that ultimately led to someone like Lenin Moreno? We have these bugs all over the house that keep bothering me. But also to the split with the indigenous community, because you had in the last election, I believe in 2021, Yaku Wadambel who was the left candidate for the indigenous group, who, I mean, some have argued basically split the vote of the left and created conditions so that Andres Arauz, who is the Correa candidate, would lose, and Guillermo Lasso would win. And now the protests are against Guillermo Lasso. So, what's going on there? What took us to the point that we're in right now, where we're on the 9th day of the national strike?
Do you want me to go first, Libre? Okay. So I would say I think where we're at right now with this national strike is due to the privatization that the Guillermo Lasso administration is pushing, because Guillermo Lasso is just a puppet of the IMF. Um, like Ecuador is a country, it's like very special in Latin America because they're a country that's dollarized, from my understanding. Like they lost their moneda, their national dollar, which was called sucre, um, and they lost it during this thing called el Ferario Banquero in the 2000s, the banker holiday, and that's actually how Guillermo Lasso became a billionaire, through that whole inflation that happened during Ecuador during the 2000s, and um let me just put my phone away. Apologize for that. So um this whole protest started because of a organization known as CONAI. CONAI is a very old indigenous anti-imperialist anarchist organization in Ecuador, that goes back to the 80s. You know, they because Ecuador has like a very rich history of having the indigenous folks there being politicized by the communists, by the socialists, in order to organize themselves for their worker benefits, and for also like their cultural, to defend their cultural institutions. So CONAI is the one that called for this paro nacional. They actually historically have always called for these kind of national strikes, these anti-neoliberalist strikes, like they did in the 90s, where they've gotten presidents to resign. But now, towards the thing you were referring to, the split in the left of CONAI and of Correa's like citizens revolution movement that he had. Um, I have folks out here in New York that work closely with Correa's movement, with the Citizens Revolution here in New York City, and I've heard like certain critiques that even people who support Correa, it's like one critique is that Correa never really claimed himself as a socialist. Like he was more like claiming himself as a liberalist, like a liberal. But I mean, he showed that he was supportive of like pink tide leaders like Hugo Chavez, like Fidel. So and also Evo Morales. You know, Evo Morales always claimed himself as being indigenous and a socialist. Correa really never pushed that narrative from my understanding. Um, he mostly I like how a brother of mine's, Ecuadorian brother, told me that Correa demonstrated about how you could be a liberal and anti-imperialist at the same time, because he did get like a military base out of this area called Manabi in the Pacific part of Ecuador, out of Ecuador. Um, but he had like a lot of tensions with the indigenous movements, and these type of little like holes here and there has caused division, where you have somebody like a Yaku Perez, who's an imposter, which was told by many indigenous organization that he wasn't truly indigenous. He was mostly masquerading himself as an indigenous person. And also it's also known that his party, Pachacuti, Pachacuti is like an indigenous word, meaning like the change of like, it's like the cosmic change in the universe. It's like this is like Quechua. This is like Quechua mythology. Inca. So he was receiving funds from these CIA agencies like the National Endowment for Democracy or USAID in order to do like it's basically like this sense of like identity politics, trying to weaponize his identity as a so-called like indigenous person, a water protector, against the left, which was Andres Arauz. It wasn't. I mean, there's if you want to make parallels too to like Petro and Pacto Histórico, like they weren't even like that anti-imperialist either. Like they were no more for like this. There's this aesthetic, there's this aesthetic of revolution, but economically wise, they're not communists, they're not like socialist. It's more like democratic socialism, like liberalism a little bit, but still, it's still a process. It's still a process. So, because actually they were trying. I mean, if they were successful, they would have brought back UNESUR, that was basically a political project under Correa that was started in order to have the possibility of creating a South American currency. I mean, like what we see with ALBA. ALBA is more like, a economic block, a culture, or like, an economic block. And UNASUR was supposed to be more of like this cultural block to bring more South American nations together and to have this formation of the UNASUR, which we're seeing the promise with Lula de Silva in Brazil, that, if we want it in Colombia, we will be triumphant in Brazil. But Lula did say that if he wins, he's going to try to push for a unified South American currency, the way that Gaddafi tried to do that for Africa. So yeah, there was oh, that was right there. There's that article right there. Yeah, there was a lot of holes. I mean, like Yaku from my memory. Oh man, it was just I'm now it's coming back to me. I'm telling you why it's coming back to me, because I also marched with Andres Arauz here in New York City. There's a big Ecuadorian community here in New York City, and best believe that they're very involved in their country's politics, because Rafael Correa, under his tenure as president, he made a seat in the Congress for the immigrants, for the folks who are immigrants in the diaspora, to have a seat in their Congress. So here in New York City, they're very active. They have an office and everything, the La Revolución Ciudadana. So yeah, so with Yaku, he was actually kind of part of the whole, like his policies were kind of like horrible economic policies. Like his economic policies sounded good, taking these aesthetics like being indigenous or water protected, but yet still having trade deals with the US, while Arauz was more about having more open trade deals with Russia, China, and Venezuela, and also still having a relations with the US. So and also like there was like this whole like this propaganda talking about how Arauz was getting money from the guerrillas in Colombia, the ELN. It's the same type of propaganda they try to do against Correa 10 years prior with the FARC. But yeah, this also brings into Colombia, like how Colombia tried to, I think you had like the general secretary that tried to accuse Arauz of receiving money from the ELN, and as well as going to Uribe. Uribe was like somebody who was kind of like the main architect of like Lasso's campaign, trying to figure out ways to say like if you vote for Arauz, Ecuador is gonna be like Venezuela, and Arauz even. I mean, yeah, Lasso even went as far as to pay Venezuelan migrants over there to hold like signs saying "Don't vote for Arauz." Oh no, you don't want Ecuador to become like Venezuela. what's the other thing? No, and Lasso also thanked Alvaro Uribe. He called him the greatest, one of the best presidents of Latin America. There's a video out there like that. And this goes into like what Lasso probably is planning for. But like I also well, I was gonna say like the plan that Lasso has had for Ecuador, like wanting to turn Ecuador into a narco state, privatizing, and also like there's this thing that I was told by one of my Ecuadorian comrades called Plan Ecuador that's supposed to be similar to Plan Colombia, to start trying to create like military bases again in Ecuador. So yeah, given all these different contexts, but I will say too, I think Lasso too has joined with the blocks that's been created by Venezuela, like CELAC. Like he does go to the CELAC meetings, which is kind of, I don't know, I don't understand that relation right there, but yeah, I hope that provides enough context. No, I know I've been told by the comrades too that due to Lasso's like administration, unemployment has gone up, violence has gone up, and narco trafficking has gone up. So, yeah, that's so far that's all the information I have so far to provide.
That's really interesting and a lot of good context and info for all of us. I just wanted to add, I looked at Yaku's policies the other day. I was looking into the situation in Ecuador and kind of reflecting on the election. And I was like, I hadn't looked into his specific policies, like his economic policies. And like you said, they're all right wing, but they're all like they were all pseudo left wing. So like he had the idea that they were gonna get rid of all mining or get rid of all extraction industry, in order to, he said it was to protect indigenous land, but it's like, industry is what brings jobs, and indigenous people need jobs. And I assume, a lot of indigenous people would be against the getting rid of the mining industry completely, or yeah. And then another one of Yaku's policies was UBI, Universal Basic Income, which for people who don't know, that was a policy invented by Milton Friedman. He called it the negative tax. And basically the idea is, you do top down, trickle down economics. But then you just have the government pay people like $10 a month or whatever, so they can buy more commodities from capitalists. You're basically just having the government pay people not to revolt under capitalism. So it's an interesting strategy of imperialism. I thought it was super interesting, the idea that they weren't just backing, a liberal or even a fascist or right winger. They were backing this sort of pseudo leftist, someone, disguised as a socialist, but really a Malthusian or liberal environmentalist.
I also it just came to me and I lost it right now. I just remembered something that was supposed to be an important. I'll come back to me.
I think it's important that you were able to make that distinction between Yaku and the actual indigenous movement, and sort of expose them as the fake indigenous left, because the picture is still being painted that he's sort of the representative of that indigenous left, and that's why the sort of split analysis of Ecuador is somewhat circulating online. Yeah, and any comments, Comrade Libre or Yhamir? Oh, it came back.
Yeah, no, it came back to me too. I mean, no, he was like an op for the CIA. I just remembered like he had like Twitter accounts attacking. He attacked Venezuela. He attacked Nicaragua. He actually was like a supporter of like the CIA-backed protests as tranques. He also kind of like insulted Evo Morales, like saying something about how can you be indigenous and a socialist at the same time, and trying to hit him with the whole like, socialism is like a European ideology type shit. And then yeah, like that guy. I mean, in Nicaragua they called him Yankee Perez. That was a funny name. But no, he did. I mean, he disrupted this moment that. I mean, I also feel too that there's criticisms like that can be given of the citizens revolution of the candidate they picked, Andres Arauz. I mean, he wasn't a bad guy, but still, like, there's this, I don't want to say it like this, but there's this caudillismo that's so internalized in us Latin Americans. It doesn't matter if it's right wing or left wing. We need to have like a strong, a very strong figure that we can believe in to, to guide the nation state, forward. I mean, this is something that's like, I don't want to sound patriarchal, but it's something that's very implanted in our minds. Like, we need, we look towards like a very strong leader, and Arauz kind of like he was a little bit too young, I feel, for the position. I understand that Correa wanted like more youth representation, but there was like something missing. Like this is my own critique. But and these same talking points, actually thinking about it, is the same things that Lasso was able to use against Arauz. Like, for example, Arauz is somebody who kind of comes from privilege. Lasso doesn't. Lasso, actually, he became a banker. He didn't have no college. He didn't have no university. He became a banker because of a marriage, like through connections of marriage and stuff, and then became like, a corrupt billionaire with all this scam stuff during like the inflation period of Ecuador. But there's a lot of the stuff that he used against Arauz and his campaign. Now, that's one critique. I hope, I don't know, I hope that the next candidate, if Ecuador has new presidential elections, is somebody like Jorge Glass, the political prisoner that was in prison because he stayed loyal to Correa's project, the Citizens Revolution. And hearing him speak, I feel like that's more, that brother right there has more like leadership, like more of that the qualities. But the thing that I remember too is that last year when I was in Venezuela, because I got invited for the bicentennial Congress of celebrating like the 200 years of the Battle of Carabobo, which brought Venezuela to its independence. I had the opportunity to see both sides. Like they invited the leader of CONAI, Yhamir Vargas, and they had youth from Correa's Citizens Revolution movement. And I remember I had an interesting conversation with Yhamir Vargas, about Correa. He actually was somebody who was arrested under Correa's government for protesting. I don't remember. I just don't remember the whole conversation like that. But he did tell me something about how he doesn't have a problem with the youth of the Citizens Revolution. I think Correa is a little bit different, but he doesn't have a problem with the youth. And actually, the person that brought that, like, because he doesn't, yeah, he was actually cool with Andres Arauz. He actually told his followers, like his supporters, to vote for Andres Arauz during when the elections were coming up against Guillermo Lasso. So that whole relationship was reconciled or brought together. Yhamir Vargas and Andres Arauz was because of Evo Morales. Because when Evo Morales was brought back into Bolivia after being ousted, and they had an event for him, the people who welcomed him and that were there was Arauz and Yhamir Vargas, and that's because of Arauz and his connection with Correa and Morales, and Yhamir Vargas being an indigenous person, part of this very big organization in Ecuador. So yeah, that's all I remember as far as like what I was able to understand, like as far as that contradiction. I mean, I think that's something that probably, this national strike can give them the opportunity to really like settle these differences at the end of the day, because we need people on all different fronts to make change happen and to possibly create the platform for revolution. But that's just about it.
Comrade Libre, do you have any comments? I saw you just sent me an ad for the Ecuador movement. I'm gonna try to figure out how to forward it to Eddie so he can share it. Do you have any comments about the situation right now in Ecuador? Some of the historical.
Throw it in the Google Doc, Carlos.
Okay.
So a lot of my so first of all, we want to highlight the demands, which is what I sent to Carlos, of why people are out in the streets, understanding that this is like a buildup. It just in this last week, unfortunately, it's really hard to cover a lot of things simultaneously as they happen, right? Because there was Colombian elections happening, as there's also a paro nacional happening in Nicaragua, as there also is a paro nacional happening in Panama. And so that being said, it's important to understand why people are going out into the streets, and understanding that el pueblo ecuatoriano, the Ecuadorian people, are continuing their fight. At the end of the day, it has to do with access to resources, and the lack of, right? So folks are asking, and oddly enough, looking at the list of demands for Ecuador, highly similar to that of Panama, right? Asking for gas prices to not be raised, asking for a year of debt, that there's not the accumulation of debt. And so what we can observe is in Ecuador, the military is suppressing the working class individuals that are going out into the streets, as well as we do not see a platform for working class Ecuadorians to amplify what they have been fighting for. Because this is the paro nacional is just we can think of it as similar to the 2020 uprisings, right? It's the camel, it's the, what is it? The straw that broke the camel's back, right? So what is happening in Ecuador should not be a surprise to anybody. If you are actually following what is happening in Ecuador, what we do understand is that it has gotten to a point where the Ecuadorian people are out in the streets marching, where journalists have been brutalized, literally. There's a video on our Instagram, right? Journalists are being suppressed to not share what is happening, to paint the impression that Ecuador is maintaining peace, when in reality, the Lasso government is suppressing the working class Ecuadorians, and refusing to heed to the demands of the working class people. And so it's interesting to observe this particular political moment in Latin America in general. We do have someone, one of our comrades from Troika, that will be there starting tomorrow to get coverage and a more of a on the ground analysis of what would be happening, of what has been happening in Ecuador. And so, like, again, standing in solidarity, we're working class Ecuadorians. It's important to understand the context as to why they're out there, and also the fact that oftentimes we will not hear about Ecuador in any on any platform, not even alternative platforms, unfortunately. And so we have to begin to also break this habit that we have, especially as those living on Turtle Island, of focusing on the places that are always like headliners, right? Like, we will always hear about Cuba, and we should focus on Cuba. We will always hear about Venezuela, and we should focus on Venezuela. We'll hear about Nicaragua. What about the places that we're not hearing about? Because those are the places, to a certain extent, where imperialism has its claws deeper, right? The fact that most people had no context of Honduras until they democratically elected Xiomara Castro, right? Her husband was overthrown. literally cooed by the U.S. government, dropped in the middle of a Costa Rican jungle, and exiled from his country. Why did we not hear about that when it happened? Well, because the U.S. interest was met, right? And we can see similar trends happening throughout the Americas in places like Ecuador that you will rarely, if ever, hear about. And so that should make you question it more. Think about the countries that we're not talking about right now. Think about Guatemala. Think about El Salvador, right? Think about Panama, and look into the news resources of those countries about what's happening, right? Because, like I said, in Ecuador and Panama right now, you have two of the largest, historically speaking, national strikes happening in the history of both of these countries. You have a move towards the left without a platform to create discussion around what's happening. And so in Ecuador, it is big that the indigenous people are choosing to, again, take a sacrifice to uphold and to stand true to the demands that are being asked, to recognize their human rights, but also to recognize their rights as indigenous people to the land of Ecuador, to stop the private interests of businesses that are trying to overthrow the public use of land, of energy. And you see these things happening in the larger context, right? Last year, Puerto Rico and Brazil both privatized energy. A lot of people are not talking about that. That is something that similar is happening in places like Ecuador, where you may not even question something like that. And so we do have to be aware of things before they become larger issues. And we can't be everywhere, but when we do talk about things, we want to be specific, and we also want to support the working class. So we need to do the research if we're going to be talking about these places, but also the places that you will least likely, the places that are not in your mind. If you look at a map of the Americas, the places that you don't see in the headlines, please do the extra effort to look at what's happening in those countries, because the suppression is monumentous, right? The largest military base in Central America is in Honduras. How many people knew that before the Honduran elections? Not many, right? The biodiversity in Ecuador that is literally being attacked right now, not only by the Ecuadorian military, but also by U.S. interests, are monumentous, right? And we have to question those things, because if we understand capitalism in its totality, it seeks to extract resources from not only people but from land. And understanding that we're in relationship to land, right? An attack on the land is an attack against socialism and communism in any place where it is fought, because we are in relationship to Mother Earth, and we are building with the earth. And so we have to be very aware of what's happening in Ecuador, and continue to support this national strike, to share information from a working class perspective.
And I just want to add real quick, I'll let Carlos or Comrade Yhamir go. I know I have to head out here pretty soon. I have to give up my room to my roommate, as usual. But I want to say, I used to think, how am I supposed to keep up on every country around the world? There's so much to keep up on. And, once you build your base of knowledge and learn about one country, it becomes easier. Like learning about Venezuela helps you learn about Colombia, helps you learn about Bolivia. These things are all intertwined, especially with the current stage of capitalism that we're at, which is a global system of imperialism. But then you mentioned, something similar. You said we can't be everywhere at once. And we can't as individuals, but we can as a collective, and it's a collective struggle. And we've been talking a lot about sources, and where are good sources to go. And been saying the best sources are the people. Go to the people. So, learn from your comrades, lean on your comrades, talk to and ask questions of the most politically advanced sections of the proletariat, people engaging in revolutionary struggle, in whatever country you're worried about, or trying to learn about, or people who are engaging in international struggle like Comrade Libre and Comrade Yhamir. I mean, I think you two are a perfect example of two politically advanced working class people who have been, forging yourselves mentally and physically in the revolutionary struggle. So now you have this vast wealth of knowledge. So, the best way to get through the imperialist bullshit is to trust some hardened comrades who have been fighting against imperialism for a long time.
And it's a process, just like revolution is the process. The process of learning is also a dialectical process. You're going to start with not a very concrete analysis, and it's going to get concrete the more you keep at it and the more consistent you are. But yeah, absolutely, that point you made about it, things about being able to involve the collective in the process of knowledge is just so important. And the point you made, Comrade Libre, about focusing on the places that are not talked about. That's really important. And one of the comrades that we've had on a few times, and we've gone on his show a few times, Comrade Ramiro. That's something that I think he does really well. And one of the things that we appreciate about his show is that if we have to plug another one, I'd say for folks to check out Comrade Ramiro Sebastian Funes, his YouTube channel and podcast, Unmasking Imperialism. It's superb. And specifically, we talked about earlier about the drug trade and some of the effects that it has, not just the billions that it makes for Colombian and U.S. capitalists, but the effects that it has on communities. He's had specialists, people who have written books on the effects of the drug trade on revolutionary music like rap, the rap atmosphere, and Black liberation movements and socialist movements in the U.S. So check his channel out. And like you said, Comrade Libre, check out the places that are not talked about, because that means that they have been successfully ignored by the mainstream media and left outlets as well. So any closing comments from either Comrade Libre or Yhamir or Eddie? You
or anything you guys want to plug either?
Yeah.
Yes, we have a comrade that is based in Ecuador. His name is Comrade Ramon, and he's been sharing content with us. Like I said, tomorrow we have a comrade flying into Ecuador to get on the ground coverage and to give a Marxist analysis of the Paro Nacional. So you can look at our Instagram for more updates on what has been happening. And we'll continue to share our resources. I mean, the thing that works in our favor is that there are significantly more working class people globally than there are oligarchs, than there are bourgeoisie. And so we need to simply unite against our primary contradiction, which is imperialism, and to combat these imperialist lies. And the only way that we can do that is by supporting one another. And so we will be sharing out interviews and resources from Ecuador, from our comrade Ramon, as well as our comrade Elias, who's getting in tomorrow. So just be pendiente, be aware of Troika, and we'll be sharing that out on our Twitter as well. And yeah, we'll be sharing out more as we learn, because we don't know everything. We are in the process of learning, and we're in the process of also learning what we don't know, so that we can understand what we're lacking in. And Ecuador is definitely one of those countries, because like I said, y'all weren't talking about it in the same way that less than maybe 2 months ago, it was not on our radar. So we can't be everywhere, but we do have Comrade Eddie shared, right? Like, it is about a collective effort, and then doing that necessary work of when we do want to talk about a place, doing the research necessary, and also supporting those that are doing that work, because people do specific work about specific things. And so thank you all, comrades. We will be watching the Paro Nacional, covering the Paro Nacional, and also amplifying the voices of Ecuadorians as they continue in their struggle until their needs are met. That being said, I'll pass on to Comrade Yhamir.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important, like, like Libre said, we need to cover these countries that never get like any limelight. Like we talk about also like Haiti, for example. Every time Haiti has a protest, there's a blackout. You never know what happens there. And that, I feel like that's very purposeful with Haiti, because Haiti is a country that's not poor. It's a country that's been punished because of its original sin in 1804, being one of the first black republics, being one of the first governments against slavery, and also one of the first governments to abolish slavery in the Americas. And the same thing goes with Ecuador. Ecuador right now, as you see, as the U.S. sees like its grip being lost in the continent, there's gonna be best believe they're gonna try to take advantage of the government that Ecuador has in order to try to experiment in Ecuador and make it into like a new bastion, a new Colombia, a new type of like bastion for their imperialist operations. But overall, hopefully, the Ecuadorian people are able to achieve gains with this national strike. I mean, I do hope. I mean, I don't know. It might be as like having a pipe dream, but like they could possibly try to like overthrow the president or have him resign, and then we could have that socialist president Correa coming back, and then the pink or red tide is in full effect. We have like a whole curve of a red. So yeah, toda solidaridad con la República Hermana del Ecuador.
Hell yeah, brothers. Thank you both for coming on. It's been a learning experience for me, and I'm sure for Eddie as well, and for the audience. You guys have great knowledge on these topics. Let's hope, as you said, that Ecuador falls as well, and that that Bolsonaro falls. I think October, right? October is when
October 2nd.
October 2nd. So let's hope
That's
that
elections? October 2nd?
October 2nd is Brazilian elections where Lula's going to win. And then we're going to be on the track to run our shit in favor of working class people in Abya.
Oh, wait, Carlos, you meant to say Lasso. To if Lasso falls, you said Ecuador.
Lasso.
Lasso, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ecuador, as in the existing order in Ecuador, if it falls,
okay.
Lasso and the people come to power. And the same thing with Bolsonaro. It's an exciting moment to be a socialist. We have this beautiful, flourishing moment of left-wing struggles in Latin America and in the U.S. Honestly, it's in moments of crisis like this where we should be like, let's go. Now it's the time to get the serious work in, right? Because the American people are also disappointed. They're living in horrible conditions. I think half of the American working class is a lost paycheck away from homelessness. And it's just absurd. This is where the super profits and the resources that are expropriated and exploited by the empire come, and the people live wretchedly. So the interest of the American working class is also with the interest of the struggles abroad. And I think we should all come together. And in a moment like this, what best than to show that it's possible? It's possible abroad, and I think it's possible at home as well. And I think the duty of socialists in the U.S. is to carry forth a revolution here, and so that the revolutions abroad can be a lot more peaceful. Well, some of the biggest obstacles for revolutions in the third world, in the East, in Africa, has been U.S. and NATO imperialism. And if we're able to get these imperialist states to collapse through a socialist revolution, the revolution will arise in other places as well where we have prevented its flourishing. So it's an exciting moment to be alive as a communist, right?
Yeah, it's exciting, and it's a time to, like you said, get some serious work done. Imperialism is the stage of capitalism we're in, and imperialism is in crisis, largely thanks to all these revolutionary movements in countries that the U.S. has tried to keep under their boot for years, who are increasingly becoming successful in overthrowing the puppet dictators of imperialism, and the forces of imperialism in general. And yeah, so it's time for us to put in that good educational work, that organizational work, and get serious about ending the empire. And I think our comrades from Troika Collective are doing an amazing job at that. So thank you so much, Comrade Yhamir and Comrade Libre, for hanging out and sharing your knowledge with us today. As Carlos said, it was super informative for all of us. So please come back anytime.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Peace, comrades. Hasta la victoria siempre.
Hasta la victoria
Peace,
siempre. Patria o muerte, venceremos.
Venceremos.
Love it.